Donald Neilson was a ruthless killer who would stop at nothing to succeed in his enterprise.
You're dealing with a killer, a callous, vicious man.
I put my knee across Neilson's throat, put the gun to his head and said, "I'll kill you, you bastard."
In the 1970s, I was a young television reporter working a lot in the north of England, and I vividly recall the name of Donald Neilson, also known as the Black Panther, and his reign of terror.
For 10 years he was hunted by the police for robbery, kidnap and murder. Communities in central England were petrified of the deadly man in the black balaclava.
But how did Neilson get away with his crime spree? And couldn't he have been brought to justice a lot sooner? I'm Fred Dinenage, and as the official biographer to the Kray twins, I quickly learned that the myth of crime can often overtake the facts of what actually happened.
That's why I'm reinvestigating some of Britain's most evil murderers. In the 1970s, the killer Donald Neilson terrified central England. Not only did he kill 3 postal workers, but he kidnapped a 17-year-old girl from her bedroom. She too would end up dead. Donald Neilson was born on the 1st of August 1936, just a few miles outside of Bradford. Growing up in wartime Britain meant that family life was tough for the young boy, especially as his father was a strict disciplinarian, something that would rub off on Neilson in later life.
I'm always fascinated by the early lives of murderers and the way their childhood might have had an impact on the crimes they would later commit. It's a fascination that's shared by one of Britain's leading criminologists, David Wilson.
When he was growing up, he was called Donald Nappy, and therefore he was bullied at school. People would taunt him by using his surname, Dirty Nappy, Nipper Nappy, and so forth. So he didn't progress as he might have progressed at school. And also, because he was so small, he never grew to being taller than 5'6". There's a sense in which he didn't quite fit in. He's incredibly close to his mother, but when he's 10, his mother dies. And that leads to the first time he gets into trouble. He breaks into the local co-op, and therefore the first brush with the law.
It wasn't until Neilson turned 18 that he found some direction in his life. Up until 1963, national service was mandatory. Neilson was one of 2 million men conscripted to serve 2 years in the British Army.
One man who, in the 1970s, reported on the Panthers' case and trial is Andrew Wright. He met some of the key characters involved, and he's agreed to share with me what he knows.
He loved the army, absolutely loved it. He was called up for national service, and he did his normal training. Surprisingly, he failed his Bren gun training, so he had to go and do his 10-week training course all over again. He later said that he'd done that on purpose, and it wouldn't surprise me, actually, because he so loved the army.
He just wanted to carry on.
It was the happiest part of his life so far.
Neilson served in Kenya, Cyprus and Aden during his 2 years in the army. Such was his devotion that he only asked for one break. That was to marry his childhood sweetheart, Irene. It was a secret affair, and neither Donald nor Irene's family were told of the ceremony. By 1960, they had a daughter, Catherine. So Donald left the army in search of a new career to support his family.
So he's come out of the army, he's a married man, he's going to try and find a job, he's going to try and find some place to live. But he's a drifter, he's restless. He's never been much of an apprentice. He's developed carpentry skills, plumbing skills, but nothing that he does, he's really able to stick at.
I think probably his most successful enterprise was, in fact, doing building for various people. But it didn't make him a lot of money, and he yearned to do better.
So he's ruthless and listless, and crucially, he needs to find a way of explaining that, not just to those people around him, like his wife, but he needs to find a way of explaining not getting on to himself.
I think he was fairly cheesed off because he was working his what's-its off, and around him he saw various people, particularly immigrants, I think, who he felt were getting money off the state, and he didn't see why they should get more money than he was actually earning. So in the winter months, he turned to crime.
By 1965, aged 29, Neilson began breaking into houses and targeted the middle classes. He believed they were the only people to keep their money at home.
Now, he's incredibly successful as a house burglar. Indeed, there are some 400 burglaries which he is believed to have committed, and he was never caught by the police. He would keep the newspaper cuttings of the burglaries when they were reported. As a psychologist, a criminologist, I know that often offenders will take cuttings of their crimes, often in a voyeuristic way. But in relation to Neilson, the indication is that he kept those cuttings as a way of informing himself. And it was almost as if it was a manual that he was training himself up so that he could become a better burglar.
And Neilson wanted a better life for his family. He changed their surname from Nappy to Neilson to avoid his daughter Catherine suffering the same bullying he'd experienced. They had no idea about his secret life and also played an unwitting role in helping him prepare for his robberies.
Unlike a family that goes out into the park to go for a picnic or whatever, Neilson would take them on maneuvers. He would go and hide in the woods and have them find him. So these were like trial runs, if you like, and the family were intimately bound up with these trial runs, although there's absolutely no evidence to indicate that they were aware of what Neilson was doing behind their backs.
The house robberies gave Neilson enough cash to get through the winter, but he wanted to make more. He was after more money for the risks he was taking.
Neilson decided to move to the next level. Back in the 1970s, many villages in the Midlands had small community post offices where people used to keep their money. Neilson decided to adapt the techniques he'd used for breaking into people's houses to entering small post offices in the middle of the night.
Neilson was meticulous in his preparation. He would spend weeks studying the layout of his intended target. He made every attempt to ensure he'd never be caught.
He's usually masked, he's dressed in black, he's clearly wearing gloves, he's carrying a gun. The gun was loaded. This wasn't just for show. He was intending to use these weapons.
To get some insight into the mind of an armed robber, I've arranged a meeting with Tom Carrigan. In the 80s and 90s, he committed a series of armed robberies on post offices and banks. He was released having served a 9-year sentence.
How did your own life of crime begin?
I was about 15 when I robbed my first shop. And we got in with people who were a bit older than us and who were a bit more ruthless than us as well. And so going along on robberies with those kind of people, gave us a sense of ruthlessness as well to carry out, serious armed robberies with loaded weapons.
Did it never occur to you you could kill somebody?
Yeah.
But it didn't worry you?
Didn't worry us, no. My consciousness about who might be a victim to me was secondary to what I wanted, So if I'm going to rob something, I'm going to go in there fully and just take what I need, take what I want. No one's going to stand in my way.
This was a motto that Donald Neilson also stood by as he began breaking into post offices throughout central and northern England.
The first 9 he attempted, including this one, were successful. The 10th, though, was to change his life and the lives of the family he encountered forever.
Donald Neilson was 37 when he targeted a small sub-post office in Harrogate, 20 miles north of his home. As the Skepper family slept inside, Neilson turned off the power to the alarm and entered the premises. But things didn't go to plan.
I think in the past he'd relied on creeping into somebody's bedroom and finding the keys, either on a bedside table or concealed in somebody's trousers or something. This time he couldn't find any, and he therefore had to go and wake somebody up.
Neilson forced the postmaster's 18-year-old son at gunpoint to search for the keys. Unable to find them, the Black Panther marched the son into his father's bedroom. Donald Skepper woke immediately. He was faced with a man dressed in black, pointing a shotgun at him. Realizing the intruder was alone, the postmaster leapt out of bed to attack him. Get in! Neilson didn't hesitate in pulling the trigger, killing Donald Skepper dead in front of his family. He escaped without stealing any money, leaving a scene of devastation behind.
If you're constantly getting your money, getting access to your money by committing robbery and never being caught, then it's like going to the office. Has he had a good day at the office? He gets lots of money. A bad day at the office, somebody tries to stop him, he has to shoot them. But he sees it as simply an occupation. This gives him the stature that's denied to him by only being 5'6". This gives him the confidence that's knocked out of him at school because his surname was Nappy. These things are really central in trying to explain the story of the Black Panther.
Neilson had no remorse for the man he'd murdered. It was a warning to other postal workers not to get in his way. The Black Panther wouldn't be afraid to kill again to get what he wanted.
I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm investigating the crimes of the Black Panther, Donald Neilson. How did he manage to murder 4 people, commit over 400 robberies, and evade the police for so long?
In 1974, Neilson was being hunted by the police for the murder of postmaster Donald Skepper. The thief was now a killer, but it didn't deter him from continuing with his spate of robberies.
In one very successful robbery after the first shooting, he escapes with something like £4,500, and he goes and cashes the postal orders that he got from that robbery in the Midlands, whereas in fact he'd robbed in the north. And in signing for the postal order, he'll often use pseudonyms which are deliberately chosen to taunt the police. So for example, he'll sign a name saying B Where or C Trail, because the postal order can be traced back to the particular post office that was robbed, and he's taunting the police. He's letting the police know, I've got one over on you.
He had rules, and those rules were things like he would always take money, cash, and orders, things that couldn't be traced. He'd never have a third party involved, so he didn't have to fence stuff. And he always had an escape route completely planned out.
Unlike Neilson, Tom Carrigan never pulled the trigger when he was an armed robber. But he does know the mentality needed to commit such frightening crimes.
When you had hurt people, did you feel badly about it?
No. I'm robbing a shop, I'm robbing a post office, I'm robbing a bank. In my head, there wasn't any victims to what I was doing, because this was an institute I was robbing, or something that had loads of money. Everybody knows or should know, to stay out the way. If you get in the way, it's your choice, So if you want to come against, somebody with a mask and a loaded shotgun, with a clear intent to not get caught, then you have to live with that consequence.
Away from crime, Neilson continued to try and live a normal family life. He spent his time renovating his house into flats, which he rented out to make extra money. His home life was becoming fractious. With his daughter, he was a strict disciplinarian. He punished any of her misdemeanors with lengthy periods of what he would call hard labor, forcing her to move piles of bricks across the yard for no reason. She had no idea her father was living a murderous double life.
From his time in the army, Neilson had developed a fascination with guns. His attic was like an armory, full of deadly weapons, an arsenal with which to plan his next post office raid. In September 1974, 8 months after his first killing, another post office raid went terribly wrong.
Neilson had targeted a small post office in Accrington, an hour west of his home. He'd made his usual preparations, but failed to discover that the owner, Derek Astin, was an ex-Royal Marine, a man who was willing to fight to protect his premises and family.
He was again woken from his bed. Don't know what woke him, but got out of bed, and I seem to recall that his wife pushed the only thing that was available beside them, bizarrely a vacuum cleaner, and said, "Attack him with this." He managed to get him out of the bedroom and onto the landing, where he was shot at almost point-blank range in the shoulder.
The wounded postmaster bravely fought with the masked intruder, and summoning all his strength, he threw him down the stairs. Neilson then pulled a second weapon from his jacket.
He was shot for his troubles with a .22. The gun was fired up the stairs, and it unfortunately entered his body in an upwards trajectory which went through his stomach, and the poor guy died very soon afterwards.
Neilson was now a double murderer. It didn't seem to affect him, though. As far as he was concerned, it was just one of the jobs he needed to do to avoid capture. The 2 murders of postal workers in the space of 8 months had not only grabbed the police's attention, but also that of the press. The headlines described the robberies, however, nobody had witnessed the Black Panther's face. Descriptions were vague, photo fits differed.
He was about 5'6", pretty stocky, very dark hair, slightly swarthy. I mean, when he went out, he must have presented quite a menacing figure, because he would have been dressed in black with a black hood. He had a number of hoods with him, always. In fact, that was a characteristic. He always had spares of everything.
How did Neilson see himself?
I think Neilson did not see himself as an offender. He used so many techniques of neutralization to justify his behavior. He was just an honest bloke being prevented from making his way in the world because there are too many rich people, too many people on benefits. A working class fellow can't get a start in life, must turn to crime if he's going to provide for his family. And I think crucially, a lot of the dressing up, that wearing the camouflage gear, wearing the mask, all of this gives us a clue, a window into thinking about his psychology.
It's almost like a roller coaster. You know, your mask is on your head and you're ready, you've got everything, you've got your weapons in place, everything's in place now. The fantasy's now just about to become real. And so you're at the height of one of the best feelings that I've ever had. You know, and the last thing you want to do is make that not happen. You know, and so as soon as you pull that mask down, you become somebody else. You psychologically cut yourself off from being a caring human being.
Neilson had established a routine. In the summer, he would carry out work as a joiner and take his family on inexpensive holidays. As the winter months approached and the work dried up, he'd begin planning his next set of robberies.
Neilson was probably unaware that his next victim had also spent time in the forces. He'd also suffered 4 years as a prisoner of war. Sidney Grayland and his wife Peggy were in their mid-50s and ran the local post office in Langley.
He always claimed to have thoroughly researched each of his targets. And I don't think he can have done in the Grayland case, because the Graylands had a very specific routine. Sidney Grayland always, after he'd received the mail and seen the last mail out of the place, he would then go and do a locking up procedure and go and fetch the car ready to take his wife home. And he stuck to that routine. Everybody said that. But this night when he went out, his wife heard a bump, and lo and behold, he'd encountered the Black Panther.
Peggy Grayland went into their garage and discovered her husband Sidney slumped on the floor. He tried to warn her he'd been shot. Before she could react, an unmasked Donald Neilson attacked her.
I think he pistol whipped her, and she was really just very lucky to live, to be honest. It was only because two policemen on their rounds realised something was wrong. They saw the lights burning when they shouldn't have been burning and went and investigated and found a scene of carnage.
Donald Neilson had committed his third murder. Thankfully, Peggy Grayland survived. She gave police the first description of the unmasked Black Panther.
Neilson knew the police now had a clearer picture of what he looked like. He was also concerned that post office security had become too tight to continue his robberies. But crime was his main source of income, and he wasn't willing to stop. He would soon be wreaking more havoc through central England, this time as a kidnapper.
I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm investigating the murders committed by Donald Neilson, otherwise known as the Black Panther. Back in 1975, Neilson was being hunted by the police for killing 3 postal workers. Despite taking almost 30,000 witness statements, they were no closer to uncovering the identity of the brutal murderer.
The crimes that he's committing are becoming far more serious, and they're becoming far more serious because, of course, he's not caught. He begins to incorporate the identity of being a super offender, somebody who can evade capture, somebody who's got one over on the police.
There were police forces from 4 different counties hunting the criminal responsible for the spate of post office murders. For my investigation, I've gone to meet a man who was involved in the case. Detective Inspector Harold Wright would eventually come face to face with Donald Neilson.
People had seen and heard him speaking, and by now we knew that we were dealing with a killer about 5'5", well built, very fit, you see. Yeah. We knew so much about him, but we hadn't got his name and address. He hadn't been fingerprinted, that was the thing. If he'd had a bit of form, he'd have been arrested before, without any doubt.
By 1975, Neilson had made over £40,000 from robbing houses and post offices. However, the career criminal believed the risk he was taking deserved to bring him more reward. He believed kidnap would be a more lucrative venture, and he already had the perfect victim in mind.
While flicking through his local paper, Neilson stumbled across what to most may appear to be an innocuous article. It highlighted how a local businessman who ran his family coach company had left £82,000 to his daughter, Leslie Whittle, and £107,000 to his son, Ronald. The company was doing well and became a prime target for Neilson.
Neilson spent 3 years devising a plan to kidnap one of the Whittles and hold them for ransom. He would later tell police that he'd targeted Ronald, but it was 17-year-old Leslie who would suffer at his hands.
This is the first time he's going to literally take another person and have that person with him through the commission of a crime. But remember, by the time he's kidnapped Leslie Whittle, he has murdered 3 people.
She was just a very ordinary teenage girl with a boyfriend, and went to college in Wolverhampton, and nobody had a bad word to say about her.
On the evening of January the 14th, 1975, Donald Neilson travelled 140 miles south to the Whittle family home in Highley. It was a stormy evening, and Leslie wouldn't have heard anyone enter her room. During that night, she came face to face with the Black Panther, her kidnapper.
I can't imagine what her whole ordeal would have been like. It must have been horrendous for her. From the moment when she was taken, kept in the back of her car, underneath a piece of foam mattress, if the Panther's to be believed, transported all that way. I mean, it must have taken, I would think, at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to get to Kidsgrove. And then taken down through this series of tunnels, No, I can't really imagine it. To a place that was dark and dank and, you know, horrible, absolutely horrible for her.
I've travelled to Kidsgrove in Staffordshire to visit the park where Leslie was held. I want to learn why this location became so instrumental in the Black Panther case.
Bathpool Park these days is a pleasant enough spot, the centre of the local community, but no one knew back in 1975 that 17-year-old Leslie was being held hostage in a drainage ditch like that with a wire noose around her neck. It was pitch black down there. She'd no idea where she was or if anyone was going to come and save her.
All that she would have heard during that time is the vermin down in the shaft moving about down there. She wouldn't have heard voices or anything of that nature from ground level. She might have heard the trains going by. There's a railway line, of course, some 50 yards away from the top of the shaft. She'd possibly have heard trains moving, and that's all that she would have heard, vermin and trains.
When Neilson kidnapped Leslie, he left a ransom note on her bed. It told the Whittle family if they wanted to see her alive, they had to act quickly. Her brother, Ronald, was instructed to take £50,000 to a phone box near Birmingham. The kidnapper believed getting the money would be easy, but he'd underestimated just what was involved, and so had the police.
Kidnapping was a very isolated type of crime in those days. This was one of the first major kidnappings in the country.
Everything about this kidnapping goes wrong. Neilson had left a ransom note, which is discovered, and it says, don't call the police. The ransom was going to be £50,000. Now, the first thing the family did, the right thing the family did, was to obviously telephone the police.
West Mercia police wanted to keep Leslie's kidnap secret. They feared if the Black Panther knew they were involved, he would kill Leslie and disappear. Their secrecy didn't last long. Within hours, her kidnap had been leaked to the media and was being reported live on the local news. It was soon hitting the headlines all over the UK.
And you know, Fred, it is a very, very key case in this respect. The handling by the police of the media in the Leslie Whittle case was an utter, complete disaster.
The police feared that media coverage had scared the Black Panther away. They told Leslie's brother not to make the ransom drop. It was a mistake. Donald Neilson had been waiting for the money.
The police have had to learn how to engage the media appropriately so that the media don't conduct their own inquiries, so that the media will stay on side, but nonetheless staying on side, giving them something so that they can put out on the 6 o'clock news.
Remarkably, Donald Neilson was undeterred by the press coverage. He contacted Ronald Whittle again and told him to follow a series of clues he'd written. They would eventually tell him where to leave the £50,000 ransom. But Neilson's instructions weren't clear. Professor David Wilson is going to show me why Ron Whittle's attempt to give the Black Panther his ransom was doomed from the start.
So, why have you brought me here?
So I've written a series of puzzles which I've placed around about the park, very much in the way that Donald Neilson had left clues for the police, for the family of Leslie Whittle to follow. And this Dymo tape is the kind of thing that Neilson wrote his clues upon. So can you follow the clues?
Walk on path, round corner to second right goalpost, stop for instructions. Second right goalpost, though, it isn't the one I thought it was.
Which one do you think it is?
It's going to be this one then. Is it this? It's confusing, but there's something in the back of the net here, so this could be another clue.
I can tell you now, it isn't another clue. You've come quite rightly because you saw a bag there, but actually it was this goalpost you should have gone to. There.
So already I would have messed it up.
Over the next 5 days, Ron Whittle failed several times to deliver the ransom. The clues he was given had no punctuation, were ambiguous, and only made sense to Neilson himself.
So this one says, Follow tree line to 5th tree from left of end of path to get instruction. But which end of the path? Does it mean that end or that end?
You see, this is part of the problem. You've got to interpret how he thinks and then communicates to you.
Well, I would guess it's that way, but it's
Okay.
only or is it this path here?
Morning.
Morning. Does that count as 1, or is that number 1?
Ronald was sent another demand. It told him to drive through the night to a park in Kidsgrove. Little did he know it was the same place where his sister was being held.
When Ron Whittle had got to the phone box he'd been directed to, he couldn't find the Dymo tape. It had in fact been pushed down the back of the board of the payphone. Nevertheless, Ron couldn't find it. He did eventually find it, but he spent some 20 minutes literally searching the phone box, and he must have been in a right old state anyway.
Another problem Ronald faced was that the Black Panther had left all the clues in public places.
So this we're saying is tree number 5. Where's the clue?
Well, that's a very good question, because I know where I placed it and it's not there. And therefore it's fallen down or it's been moved.
So it may have dropped around here somewhere. There we are.
That's the clue.
It's the first thing I've got right so far. It's
And
incredible.
what does it say?
It says, put bag with money into ditch by next tree.
But there's another problem.
Which way?
Which way? Which
God.
way did he mean?
What
Which
a-
by the next tree? Is it that tree or is it that tree there?
What a nightmare.
It's clear to see that with time against him and in a distressed state, Ronald Whittle would have had no chance following the Black Panther's demands. The last clue took him to Bathpool Park, where he waited for a torchlight to flash at him. But again, he'd misread Neilson's instructions and was in the wrong place.
Neilson was obviously watching from a vantage point. Ron Whittle had been directed to look for Neilson flashing a light, a torch. Neilson saw, in fact, a police car early on. He said he saw a helicopter, something denied by the police. And he started to believe that a police operation had been put together. So he was spooked.
Donald Neilson made several attempts to collect the ransom, but each time he failed. A week after Leslie's kidnap, communication stopped. The Whittle family had no idea if Leslie was dead or alive, and worse was yet to come.
I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm investigating the crimes Donald Neilson committed in the 1970s. He killed anybody who would get in his way.
And now he was responsible for the kidnapping of a 17-year-old girl called Leslie Whittle. Donald Neilson disappeared when he didn't receive the ransom he demanded for Leslie Whittle's safe return. The search was now on, not only to catch the man known in the media as the Black Panther, but also to find Leslie Whittle. 7 weeks had passed after the failed ransom drop at Bathpool Park. Now Harold Wright and his team carried out a proper search of the area. They discovered a tunnel running 60 feet under the park. Inside, they found Leslie Whittle's dead body. She'd been hanged.
It was a shocking sight when a 17-year-old girl, wired noose round her neck, hanging down there in pitch darkness. That poor girl had been hanging there possibly for several days before she died. Even if he'd meant the girl to remain alive, he'd left her 60 feet underground with a wire noose round her neck so that if she'd slipped, she'd have hung herself. So she couldn't move about off the landing or anything. She was fastened there like a dog.
The search for the Black Panther went cold. There'd been no new post office raids or kidnaps, but the police weren't giving up.
Every day we briefed 150 officers or thereabouts as to what had gone on during the previous 24 hours while they'd been on duty, you know. And this was every day for 9 months. It's not thing that died away and then come back again.
It was by pure chance that Stuart Mackenzie became involved in the case. He was a bobby on the beat at the time.
Now I'm going to find out how he and his colleague Tony White became instrumental in the capture of the Black Panther.
We were sat down a side road, catching up on the previous night's paperwork. And whilst we were sat there, Tony looked up through the front windscreen of the car and said, "See that chap there? I don't like the way he's walking. Something wrong with him." So he says, "Come on, let's go and check him out." So I drove the car and we pulled up at the side of him. Tony then wound the window down of the car and said, "Good evening, sir. Would you mind telling us your details?" And the next thing I hear is, "Don't move. Any tricks and you're dead." To which I sort of looked to me left and saw that I was looking down the business end of a sawn-off shotgun. To which my words were, "Fucking hell."
Donald Neilson forced Tony White into the back and climbed into the passenger seat.
And then he put the gun in my armpit and he said, "Drive, any tricks and you're dead." Of course I said, "Well, where to?" He says, "Just drive, any tricks and you're dead."
The Black Panther demanded they drive him to Blidworth, a town 6 miles away. At no point were they to look at him or each other. Slowly, Stuart's colleague managed to change his position on the back seat.
At that point, we got eye contact. And my main concern was, sort of kept doing that. In other words, get this gun from out of my armpit. And he kept going, sort of shaking his head and saying no. And I'm going down towards this junction. And I said, "That's it, I'm lost." I said, "I don't know whether we'll go right here," and I physically swung the car over to the wrong side of the road, or whether we go left, and I swung it back again. And at that point, Neilson looked out the window. I hit the brakes of the car, the gun goes off. And at the same time, I've hit the door and I've rolled out the police car. As I'm doing that, Tony shouts, "He shot me."
Thinking that his partner was dead, Stuart forced Neilson out of the car. In doing so, he grabbed hold of the shotgun that had nearly killed him.
I put my knee across Neilson's chest and throat, put the gun to his head and said, "I'll kill you, you bastard." And I'm not ashamed to say that, because it was our lives that were at risk. And I'm sort of stood like this with an arm lock, and unbeknown to me, he's ferreting under his jacket. And as we found out later, he'd got knives under his coat. That's what he was going for.
Miraculously, Tony White wasn't dead and came to Stuart's aid. Their car had come to a standstill outside a fish and chip shop. The customers came out to help subdue the man who'd attacked the police. In the end, Stuart and Tony had to prevent members of the public killing the man they'd captured. It had taken 10 years, but through a stroke of pure luck, the Black Panther's reign of terror was finally at an end.
Next morning, I was on duty at Kidsgrove when an assistant chief constable from Nottingham phoned up and spoke to me. He said, "I think we've got your man," simple as that. I said, "We'll come over." So we brought him back and we got to Kidsgrove about 1:30 in the morning. But we didn't go to bed. We had a couple of hours talk with Neilson.
What did he say to you?
Well, not admitting anything, but at least he gave us a name and address.
The police searched Neilson's house and quickly discovered the attic. There they found his cache of weapons.
We recovered so many exhibits at the house, we didn't need him to confess to the crime.
You'd got him bang to rights.
We got enough evidence to put him before the court and say to the jury, "Well, you decide."
On June the 14th, 1976, Donald Neilson pleaded not guilty to the 9 charges against him, including the murder of 4 people. The trial at Oxford Crown Court meant the public were finally going to hear from the man who'd evaded capture for 10 years.
You know, it's very, very unusual in my experience, and I've been to many court cases about serial offenders. They rarely take the stand. Neilson wanted to go and put his side of the story because he believed he had a side to describe. It's an incredibly arrogant attitude.
And you sat very close in court on a number of occasions to Neilson. What were your impressions of him?
He really did look a little bit evil, menacing. The one time that really stands out for me was when he was handed a weapon, one of the sawn-off shotguns that he'd used in his raids, and just in front of him were all the exhibits. There were 2 rows of exhibits. There were shells from those guns, and he was handed the gun, and he literally turned it around like that, and everybody in the press box and in the galleries and so on all instinctively ducked.
He almost was trying to present himself as some kind of anti-hero. For example, in terms of robbing the sub-post offices, he said, well, it's government money. Nobody's been harmed, ignoring, of course, the fact that he had murdered 3 sub-postmasters in the commission of those robberies. So he's using a variety of techniques of neutralization to say, don't think of me as this really bad offender. I'm just a regular guy, is the kind of attitude that he's trying to put over.
The crucial part of Neilson's testimony came when he described the death of Leslie Whittle.
He admitted that he ran back down the complex to hide, and he claimed that it was at this point that Leslie went over the edge as she tried to make room for him on what was a fairly narrow ledge. I think it was one of the times he gave himself away, because he said, she saw my face, she saw the panic in my face. And he said, well, you'd always told us that you were wearing a mask. And he said, no, it was my kind of demeanour, and he tried to backtrack, but he had said that.
I think we can dismiss his argument quite simply. He has, by the stage that he kidnapped Leslie, already killed 3 people. I've got no doubt that when he didn't get that ransom, he killed Leslie Whittle.
This was a belief that was also held by the jury, and after just 5 hours deliberation, they returned to give their verdict. Donald Neilson was found guilty. He was given 5 life sentences for the murder of Leslie Whittle and the 3 postmasters.
The judge recommended that Neilson receive a whole life tariff. He's now spending the rest of his life in prison.
The impact of his crimes is still felt amongst the victims and their families today. Stuart Mackenzie and Tony White both received a Queen's Gallantry Medal for capturing Donald Neilson.
It wasn't so much for us, but we'd done something that every policeman in the country had been trying to do, and when we'd arrested him we thought, yes, we've got him. And this medal really is for Hull Police Force to say that we got one of the most evilest, dangerous men that ever walked this earth at that time.
The list of Donald Neilson's crimes makes shocking reading. He committed over 400 robberies, 2 attempted murders, and carried out 4 brutal killings. The facts of this case are extraordinary.
The police took 30,000 witness statements, and still it took a simple coincidence to catch this lone man. It shows that sometimes, no matter how hard the police work, it is a random piece of luck that's the important factor in bringing a criminal to justice. Without that luck, Donald Neilson may never have been caught. Thankfully, he is behind bars and will remain there for the rest of his life.
Many people think that Ruth Ellis is the victim. She's not the victim. She's a cold-blooded killer.
I feel an enormous sympathy for her because I feel that she was a victim of her time.
As far as the law was concerned, she pulled the trigger, she killed a man in cold blood, and therefore she should be found guilty and hanged.
In 1955, a murder was committed outside this pub at Hampstead in London. The victim was David Blakely, and what made his killing so shocking was that his attacker had been his lover, Ruth Ellis. What I want to know is what would drive a woman to hunt down and kill in cold blood the man that she loved, and just how responsible was she for her actions? I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm the official biographer of the Cray twins. Well, in 1955, I was just a teenager when the case of Ruth Ellis hit the headlines. I still remember the story. It provoked a national outcry.
Even today, the murder Ruth committed and the punishment she received divides public opinion. Her name remains in the history books as the last woman to be hanged in Britain. Ruth Ellis was born Ruth Neilson in Rhyl, North Wales on the 9th of October 1926. She was one of 6 children brought up in a traditional working-class family. Her father, Arthur, was a jobbing musician, and as a family, they followed him around the country.
Sadly, most of the people involved in the Ruth Ellis case have now passed away. But there's one man who interviewed several key witnesses for a book he co-wrote in 1977. He's the award-winning writer Lawrence Marks. We're actually, Lawrence, in the bar of the Magdala Public House in Hampstead. Let's go back to Ruth Ellis's childhood, her young life. What sort of life was it?
She was a bit rebellious, a difficult child. She was not academically gifted in any way, and the family tended to move around. I mean, the life of her father really dictated how the family lived. When he was in work, they lived fairly well, and when he wasn't, which was quite a lot of the time, things were very, very difficult.
Ruth left school at the age of 14 and moved with her family to the heart of London, where she found work in a factory. It was wartime, but far from restricting Ruth, it gave her a new lease of life. The mousy brown girl dyed her hair blonde. By the age of 16, she was beginning to frequent the dance halls. It was here that she was to meet her first boyfriend.
Well, Ruth was a very keen social dancer, and on this particular evening in 1943, she met a Canadian soldier, not what you would call attractive, but probably with a very full wallet. And they danced, and I think their relationship developed, and it was really Ruth's first love.
I've arranged to meet a lady who was brought up surrounded by the nightclubs and dance halls of London. Author Pip Granger has made a study of the life of Ruth Ellis and can give me a real insight into what actually went on.
I mean, she was 16, 17, she was dazzled. It was something she'd never come across before. And all the glamour in the ballrooms, you know, the glitter ball, the lovely frocks, because it was a time when English girls had had 6 years of war, no money. They were using gravy browning instead of stockings to make their legs look dark, and, you know, they couldn't afford nylons. So it would have been extremely glamorous to her.
10 years older than Ruth, Canadian Claire Andre introduced Ellis to the luxuries she was far from used to. He sent her carnations and would wine and dine her in the restaurants of Soho.
Claire told her that he really would like to marry her. And Ruth was probably exceedingly flattered that this man in uniform would want to give his life to this young blonde woman.
Ruth's life changed forever at the age of 17 when she fell pregnant. Claire Andre's promises of marriage were revealed to be nothing more than false hope.
What Ruth didn't know, of course, and she didn't get to know this until some investigation into his background was conducted by, of all people, her mother, was that Claire was married with children in Canada. Ruth experienced for the first time rejection and how easily she could fall in love. And I think how easily she could fall in love really was the thread that ran through this story.
At the age of 17, Ruth had a baby boy whom she named Claire Andrea Neilson. She was now a mother with a child out of wedlock, frowned upon by others. Ruth made a conscious decision she wasn't going to be a victim. She wanted to take control of her life. Leaving her baby boy in the care of her family, she went back into the heart of London in search of work.
She would have had a real trouble getting a job. So she ended up applying for and getting a job at the Camera Club, which involved her posing naked.
You know, men used to go down to this club with their cameras. Few had film in them, I ought to say. And she would just disrobe and sit there in a static pose and be photographed by men. And she knew that the movement of her body, the eye contact, her youth, her pertness, could affect men. And I think that was the first time she really, really discovered that she had this control over men.
Ellis's striking blonde looks and newfound sexuality had financial benefits. She was soon offered employment as a hostess at the Court Club in London.
Many believe it was a combination of events during Ruth's life that caused her to commit murder. One man who studied what it takes to drive people to kill is criminologist Professor David Wilson.
Ruth Ellis is making very conscious decisions about the kind of lifestyle that she wants. So we can almost see her journey from Rill to London, from London into factories. She becomes a photographer's model, she takes her clothes off, and from there it's actually a relatively short step to work in Mayfair nightclubs as a hostess.
She was responsible for selling drinks at exorbitant prices. I'm told that cider looks like champagne in a flute and you can charge 3 guineas for it. That's what you did.
She was an incredibly hard worker. You know, when she was working in Woolworths in Brixton, she was earning £2 a week. When she was working in the clubs as a hostess, she was taking home £20 a week. Well, we mustn't try and think that this is somehow a poor woman who's kind of blinded by the lights, the glitter, the glamour, the glitz of London. This is somebody who's very consciously making a decision that she can earn more money, provide better for her family, and she can be the person that she wants to be.
The role of hostess involved more than selling drink. Ruth earned extra money by having sex with the clients of the Court Club.
She started as a nude model at the Camera Club, but once she'd done that, she crossed an invisible line. So it wasn't a really big step then for taking money for something that I think she quite enjoyed. I mean, I think she liked sex in a time when women weren't supposed to.
Ruth was leaving behind the life of poverty she'd experienced as a child. Her ability to make money from her clients enabled her to move on and become manager of the Mayfair hotspot, the Little Club. This seemingly glamorous life wasn't easy though. Ruth underwent several illegal abortions during her time working as a hostess.
Ruth had made it clear that she would never get personally involved with any of the gentlemen that visited her club. However, one man proved persuasive in changing her mind. George Ellis was a dentist who regularly frequented the club. He was 21 years older than Ruth and infatuated with her.
As with all of Ruth's love interests, things weren't quite what they seemed. George was an alcoholic.
There's a sense in which George Ellis is an older man, alcoholic, dependent upon her. She must have felt in some way that she could control that relationship better than she'd been able to control the relationship with Claire Andrea, who had abandoned her.
Ruth married George Ellis at a registry office in Tunbridge in Kent. Two unsuspecting passers-by were the only witnesses to the ceremony.
They have a child, Georgina, although George Ellis denies that Georgina could be his. He thinks that Ruth Ellis has clearly been sleeping around. Alternatively, Ruth Ellis thinks that he's been sleeping around. So we're back to this sense in which she doesn't trust the men in her lives.
The marriage would only last for a year, and it wasn't George's alcoholism that would split them up. Ruth's jealousy was to blame.
She was pathologically jealous. I mean, when George Ellis was taken into Wallingham Park, which was a drying out hospital really for alcoholics, Ruth got it into her head, for no good reason, that George, far from drying out, was having affair after affair with nurses in Wallingham Park, and she used to stake out the hospital.
By 1951, the Ellis marriage had disintegrated, even though Ruth was pregnant. She left George less than a year after their wedding day, and Ruth's dreams of a life of security were in tatters. But it wouldn't be long until she met the man who would be the love of her life, and ultimately, her downfall. I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm investigating the case of Ruth Ellis. I want to know what made her shoot down the man she loved in cold blood.
The blonde-haired nightclub hostess caused controversy when she became the last woman to be hanged in Britain.
So she'd had 2 children, she'd been divorced, and despite everything, she still returned to being a hostess and leading a life in the clubs. Why would she do that? Was it money?
Well, I think by that stage, she's been given this glimpse of the lifestyle that she could lead by working in this way. So of course she's going to return. It's a very conscious decision to return. And once you've cut off your roots, once you've said, I don't want that past, I want something different, could you really go back to that past? Could you really go back with your tail between your legs? Ruth Ellis wasn't somebody to look backwards. Ruth Ellis was somebody who wanted to look forwards.
Ruth's role as a nightclub hostess gave her the opportunity to party with the motor racing fraternity. It was amongst this group of young playboys that she met the man she would go on to kill. His name was David Blakely.
On first seeing David Blakely, Ruth said, "In strolled David wearing a coat and flannel trousers. I did not like his manner from the start. I thought he was too hoity-toity by far."
She rather hoped she'd never meet him again, but he turned up at her club, I think, and they were still a bit cool towards each other because she didn't like his behaviour, but within a month he was living with her and living off her.
David Blakely was 3 years younger than Ruth. He came from a wealthy family and had been left £7,000 when his father died. He spent the majority of his time working on sports cars and had an ambition to become a professional racing driver.
She was a groupie in many ways. Yeah. I mean, she was a groupie before her time. And she latched onto this guy, and she was taken by his voice, his good looks, and his desire, I suspect, to be a racing driver, which she saw as being quite glamorous.
Here's the kind of man that she feels she deserves. Here's the kind of man who's aspirational for this girl, this strictly brought up girl from Rhyl in Wales.
But looks can be deceiving. Blakely's inability to keep a job and his obsession with motor racing drained his inheritance. His drinking increased. He was soon left penniless. He relied on Ruth to provide him with free booze at her club and also her bed for the night.
It was one of those awful sort of cyclical relationships. Grand passion, great lust, followed by extreme violence, huge makings up, and back on the old treadmill again. Neither of them understood each other or themselves.
Ruth and David's relationship wasn't monogamous. Ellis continued to work as a hostess, providing sexual services to the men who visited her club. Blakely, already engaged to an heiress, spent time with various women. This complicated arrangement caused jealousy and led to violent fights.
It was a stormy relationship on both sides. Ruth Ellis, when she was drinking, could be very violent herself. Blakely was clearly very violent to her, but she was particularly jealous of him. She was incredibly possessive.
David took Ruth to race meetings and exclusive parties. But David's friends weren't impressed by the blonde-haired woman who hung on his arm. One couple who frowned upon the relationship were David's friends, the Findlaters.
They kind of mothered and fathered him, and they just thought that this blonde manageress at the little club was not the sort of girl that they wanted to see him with. So they, in time, started talking him out of the relationship. You know, she's a good screw, that's really what she is. So screw her and get rid of her.
By 1954, David Blakely was having a negative impact on Ruth's lifestyle. The owner of the club made her pay extra rent because Blakely was living with her. It was then that Ruth took up with another man, Desmond Cusson. At 33, he was a few years older than Ruth, and many believe he would play an integral role in the murder of David Blakely.
Here was a man who I think genuinely loved her. He cared for her. Nothing was too much for Cusson where Ruth was concerned. And Ruth really appealed to him. I can imagine why. I mean, again, she was very good looking and she was very kind to him. And he, in turn, was very kind to her. In fact, the only man I suspect in her life, including her father, that treated her like a woman. And, but there was Blakely. And Blakely was the excitement and Cusson was the reliability. And at 26, 7 years old, you don't want reliability.
She always had to be the centre of attention. She didn't. And whenever Blakely looked as if he was straying a bit, which he did with monotonous regularity, she would use Desmond Cousins to goad him, you know, to make him jealous.
Ruth's plan to make Blakely jealous worked. He ended his engagement with the heiress and began to talk to Ruth about marriage. It was exactly what she hoped would happen. But this didn't end the violent, jealous rows or stop Ruth from seeing her alternate lover, Desmond Cusson.
She treated Cusson badly, didn't she?
She treated Cusson, in my opinion, as badly as Blakely treated her. And this became a very dangerous triangle because in the middle was Ruth, and on one side was unreliable excitement that at any minute could flare up and punch her in the face in front of people. I mean, this wouldn't be done in private. And there, sitting there, was a man who could give her really everything that would have suited her life, watching and thinking, why is that man there, who I hate the sight of, hitting the woman I love full in the face with his fist and kicking her in the stomach?
Their relationship spiraled out of control. It was affecting Ruth's job. She was given an ultimatum by her boss to choose between her career as a hostess or her lover, Blakely. She chose Blakely. In doing so, she became homeless. Desmond Cusson saw his opportunity and offered her the chance to move in with him. With no other choice, she accepted.
When Blakely drank her and misbehaved her, really, out of her job, she was homeless. Cousins gave her a home, gave her an income, and would allow, and this I can't understand, allow Blakely to come and visit and sleep with her in his flat. I've often wondered if he might be a voyeur, but there's been no evidence of that. It's just that he was besotted and he was prepared to go to any lengths to keep hold of her. So he would drive her all over the place looking for Blakely when she was in one of her jealous rages.
In 1955, Ruth told Blakely she was pregnant. Nobody knows if she planned to keep the baby, but the pregnancy ended in tragedy.
It was in late March that David and Ruth had yet another violent row. It was then, according to Ruth, that David punched her in the stomach. Days later, she miscarried.
The love triangle came to a head during Easter 1955. David Blakely had promised to spend the weekend with Ruth. She dressed for an evening out, but he didn't turn up. Fueled by Pernod, Ruth's jealousy began to rise. She thought she'd track Blakely down to his friend's house, the Finlaters.
She made endless phone calls to the Finlaters' house, and they either ignored her, insulted her. She turned up at the house, they wouldn't let her in. She had a feeling that he was knocking off their nanny.
Again, it's all about jealousy. It's all about possession. It's all about the sense in which Ellis feels that she's going to be abandoned. You start with a Canadian serviceman, you go on through George Ellis, you go on through David Blakely, and therefore this anxiety, this worry that here again is another man who's prepared to leave her.
Ruth damaged David's car outside the Finlaters in an attempt to bring him out of hiding. It failed. The police were called and persuaded a furious Ellis to go home. As she was driven away by Desmond Cusson, she made the deadly decision that would change her and David Blakely's lives forever.
I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm investigating what drove Ruth Ellis to kill her lover, David Blakely, here outside the Magdala pub in London.
Just what were the events that led to this tragic case that resulted in Ruth being the last woman to be hanged in Britain? The year was 1955, and nightclub hostess Ellis had been abandoned by her long-term lover, David Blakely. Fueled by alcohol and in a jealous rage, she made the decision she wanted him dead. It's alleged it was at this point she turned towards her alternate lover, Desmond Cusson, for help.
What I now know to have happened next was they left in Cusson's car to somewhere like Burnham Beeches. I think it was Burnham Beeches. And Cusson produced a loaded gun. And he's taught Ruth how to fire a gun with the view to killing Blakely, because Ruth had professed a desire to shoot the bastard, quite frankly.
It was Easter Sunday. Since Good Friday, David Blakely had been hiding from a frantic Ellis. Now she set out to hunt him down.
For 3 days, Ellis has been drinking, taking tranquilizers, is in a heightened emotional state. The adrenaline would be running through her veins. Cusson is going to drive her to the pub. We don't know. What is Cusson saying to her as he's driving her to the pub? This is a man who's shown her how to fire the weapon, has loaded the weapon for her. Is he encouraging her as they reach the pub in Hampstead? Is he saying, oh, don't be daft, you know, let's just drive on? Or is he in fact propelling Ruth Ellis to go forward with her plan of shooting David Blakely?
She discovered Blakely's car parked outside the Magdala pub in Hampstead, London. As she peered through the window of the pub, she saw he was inside, drinking with a friend.
He then paid for his drink, walked out the door over there, outside, and there was Ruth standing with a Smith & Wesson loaded, 6 bullets in the barrel. And she called David. And David looked round and saw Ruth with a gun in her hand.
Blakely's first instinct was to run, but he didn't get far. Ruth pulled the trigger. She fired 2 shots, and then a third that cut him down. Ruth coolly walked up to David's body and emptied 2 more shots into him. Blakely lay dying. With her mission accomplished, she then turned the gun on herself, but the gun jammed.
By this time, a crowd had gathered, and it just so happened that a member of the crowd was an off-duty policeman. And she turned to him and said, "Call the police." And he said the immortal line, "I am the police." And she handed in the gun and gave herself up quietly.
I've worked with a number of murderers, and even if the adrenaline is pumping through their veins, once they achieve the kill, they're almost deflated, they're almost flat. And I do get that impression that Ruth Ellis had achieved what she wanted to achieve, and that was all she wanted to achieve. So yes, please arrest me. I've done what it is I set out to do.
Professor David Wilson has arranged an experiment to demonstrate the emotions that would have faced Ruth Ellis on the night of the murder.
So Fred, I've brought you to the National Shooting Centre in Bisley. Have you ever fired a gun before?
Never fired a gun in my life. In fact, to be honest, never held one, really.
Gun culture is not really part of British culture, but here we are in a legitimate place where you can fire, for the first time, a gun. I'm trying to recreate Easter Sunday, 1955. Ruth Ellis goes to the Magdala pub in Hampstead and she's going to shoot and kill David Blakely. So what I would like to see you is obviously shoot the gun and ask you about the power that it took to pull the trigger. I want to know how you felt when you have done that. Obviously we can't use the gun that Ruth Ellis would have used, which was a .38 Smith & Wesson. We're not allowed to use that type of weapon since Dunblane, but this is the closest we can get to the type of firearm she would have used. So I want to see you shoot this at that target.
Okay.
I think you've hit the target. Shall we go and see?
Yes.
So how did that feel?
The gun is ever so heavy, but it's feather-light, the trigger. The moment you touch the trigger, bang.
But you've never fired a gun before.
No.
What sort of emotions were you going through?
When it fires, an incredible sensation of power. Power, you know, that big bang and the smoke. And having done that, you want to carry on firing.
The adrenaline running?
Yes.
Imagine if you had been drinking Pernod. Imagine if you'd been taking tranquilizers. Imagine if it was your lover that had just dumped you.
I can understand how it happened for Ruth Ellis.
And of course, women, by and large, don't murder people in this way. They usually use poison, they use other types of ways of killing their victims. So here we've got a woman at the edge of a nervous breakdown almost, firing at her lover.
Well, this is where David Blakely was murdered, outside the Magdala pub in London, shot by Ruth Ellis. It must have been a truly horrific occasion. I'm about to meet a witness of the aftermath. His name, Martin Hart. You were here that fateful Easter Sunday night. Tell me what happened.
I was 8 years old and I was walking home with my father past Hampstead Heath Station and into South Hill Park when we heard the shots. It sounded like a car backfiring. And my father brought me up the road and we saw Blakely's body lying there with the blood pumping out of him. And I think my father forgot I was with him because he went over to see if he could do anything. And I saw Ruth Ellis being taken into the pub.
What were your impressions of Ruth Ellis? A striking lady?
She looked as cool as a cucumber. She looked relieved somehow. It's as though what she'd intended to do was finished with and it was over.
I mean, you were an 8-year-old boy at the time. How did it all affect you? Were you shocked?
It dawned on me, oh, it isn't just a game. So something real has happened.
Ruth was taken to Hampstead Police Station, telling the police she was guilty and a little confused. Within hours, she made a confession outlining how she'd set out to kill Blakely. At no point did she mention Desmond Cusson. When asked where she got the gun, Ruth told the police she'd been given it by one of her clients from the club to pay off a debt. Ruth Ellis was charged with the murder of David Blakely. If found guilty, she would face the death penalty.
As far as Ruth was concerned, at the moment she was arrested by PC Alan Thompson and taken to Hampstead Police Station, which is 3 minutes away from here. She had no desire to live at all. She had killed the man she loved, and now she wanted to be with him. So the quicker she could die, the better.
The judge allocated to her trial was Lord Justice Cecil Havers. His daughter, Baroness Butler Sloss, has agreed to talk to me about his involvement.
He was very much of the old school, of course they say, born in the Victorian era. He was a kind man. He was entirely fair. He had very clear guidelines as to how judges should behave. And he was a traditionalist, so he applied the law as he thought the law was.
On the 20th of June 1955, Ruth Ellis stood trial for the murder of David Blakely at the Old Bailey. It was up to Ruth to convince the jury that she didn't know what she was doing when she killed Blakely. But Ruth Ellis was unwilling to play the role of victim.
Ruth had re-dyed her hair platinum blonde to the horror of her solicitors. As she was brought into the courtroom, members of the gallery were shocked, and one was even heard to exclaim, "Tart."
I think one problem was that she was dressed as a hostess, I think, in court, with peroxided hair, which in those days was not so usual. She had a career which was of a certain type of woman, and therefore she was much less likely to have public sympathy.
They'd have called her a brassy blonde, and it's no accident that the slang for a prostitute at the time was brass, because people who dyed their hair must be loose women in those days. And she would have been seen as a glamour puss, and therefore a glamour puss would automatically be seen as a girl with loose knicker elastic.
Ruth initially wanted to plead guilty, but her defence believed there were mitigating circumstances that had led her to kill Blakely. When she finally took to the stand, she pleaded not guilty. Her trial would last only 2 days and proved to be one of the most controversial in British legal history.
I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm re-examining the events that led to Ruth Ellis killing her lover in 1955.
Why did her hanging lead to a change in the law and contribute to the end of capital punishment? The murder trial at the Old Bailey lasted for just 2 days. Ruth pleaded not guilty. Her defence's aim was to persuade the jury that Ruth hadn't been of sound mind when she pulled the trigger. However, in 1955, diminished responsibility wasn't on the statute book. All they could hope for was for Ellis to be found guilty of manslaughter.
Her defense was pretty meager, to say the least. Various issues did not come out at court that might have put the circumstances of her life in a better context. We might have heard more about the tranquilizers that she was using. We might have heard more about the baby that she lost. So there was quite a lot that didn't come out at court that probably would have helped her.
The court called Desmond Cusson. His testimony would be crucial in determining Ruth's guilt.
He should probably have been in the dock with Ruth Ellis. He provides her with the gun. He loads the gun for her. He shows her how to fire the gun. He drives her to the Magdala pub. And of course, in the background, Cusson has been this love rival for Ellis's affection.
Desmond Cusson was questioned by the prosecution about his relationship with Ruth Ellis. He admitted they were lovers. The defense lawyer's cross-examination was surprisingly short. His questioning focused on whether Cusson had ever seen bruising on Ruth's body. He confirmed he had. At no point was he asked about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, or if he provided Ruth with the gun.
Many believe it was Ruth Ellis's own testimony that sealed her fate. When asked by the prosecution what she intended to do when she fired the gun, she replied, "It's obvious, when I shot him, I intended to kill him." Was your father, do you recall, surprised that she hadn't made more of a defence?
I think he couldn't quite believe it was such a straightforward case. But he applied the law. And his job was to tell the jury what the law was and the facts. The facts were extremely simple. She had a gun, she'd been given it, and she shot her lover, absolutely out in the open in the street. And once the jury had that information and no mitigating circumstances, they had to convict.
The jury took just 23 minutes to come to a decision. They found Ruth Ellis guilty. Mr. Justice Havers sentenced Ruth to death by hanging. She calmly accepted her fate.
There was a very cold, quiet sort of feeling in court. Nobody moved. Absolute silence when the death penalty was pronounced.
The press and public took up her case. A petition signed by 50,000 people was handed to the Home Secretary. They didn't think this woman should be executed for murdering her lover. Some questioned whether a woman could even be responsible for such a premeditated crime. I want to know why so many people supported a convicted killer. Professor David Wilson has a psychological experiment to explain why people find it so hard to believe that a woman can kill.
A boy and his father are driving on the M25, and unfortunately there's a dreadful accident and the boy's father dies. Luckily, the ambulance gets to the car crash quickly enough to stabilize the boy and take him to the nearest hospital. As he's being wheeled into the operating theatre for emergency surgery, the surgeon stops and says, "I'm sorry, I can't conduct this operation. This boy is my son." What's going on in that story?
I honestly haven't got a clue. He's my son,
Yes.
and yet his father was in the car crash with
Yes.
him. And his father has died.
His father has died.
Mistaken identity.
No.
But he can't be his son because his father, the father of the boy, is dead. So how can his father be the surgeon?
Well, Fred, you're not the only person who argued that. I've been asking lots of people the same question I've just asked you, and just watch what they say as well.
To be honest, no idea.
No idea.
No. Got no idea at all.
No idea. Unless a surgeon's like a god or something like that.
Stepfather, possibly?
I have no idea. No, I don't know.
I'm none the wiser.
The surgeon says, "I can't conduct this operation because this boy's my son," because that is his mother. The surgeon is a woman, and the gender assumption is, as soon as I said surgeon, you thought man.
What does that tell you about me and my thought process?
Well, it tells me this, because these people were told the answer in the way that I've just told you, and here's what they said.
Yeah, okay. I just assumed it was a man.
You automatically think surgeon's going to be a man?
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, a little bit wrong for me to assume, but yeah.
Of course a woman can be a surgeon.
So we all assumed the same thing and we were all wrong. Why did we do that?
Well, the key thing was what the last interviewee said. Of course a woman can be a surgeon, and of course a woman can be a killer.
Only a day before her execution, Ruth was persuaded to appeal. She revealed the extent of Desmond Cusson's role in the murder of Blakely. The call was put out from the Home Office to find Cusson.
Cusson must have been in a state of absolute panic. He went into hiding and they never found him, and at midnight they called off the search and Ruth was doomed.
At 9 a.m. on the 13th of July 1955, prisoner number 9656 was taken to the gallows. Ruth Ellis was hanged for the murder of David Blakely. She was the last woman in Britain to be put to death.
On June the 21st, Ruth Ellis was found guilty of murder at the Old Bailey and sentenced to death in accordance with the law. On July the 13th, she was executed in accordance with the law. But Britain's conscience was uneasy. During those 3 weeks, while public controversy mounted, one man had a terrible decision to make, Home Secretary William Lloyd George. As he went about his public duties, he had to decide whether or not to write the grim words, "The law must take its course." But in the end, he had no choice. As the law stands, and as precedent dictates, Ruth Ellis had to die. For the hundreds who waited at Holloway Jail on execution morning, and for the millions who stayed away, 3 questions remain. Should a woman hang? Should anyone hang at all? Or should there be degrees of murder?
Ruth was executed by the famous hangman Albert Pierpoint. He had concerns about hanging Ruth and told them later to Lawrence Marks.
He said to me that she gave me the sort of smile I would have expected had I gone down to the Little Club, a welcoming smile. And I didn't feel right about hanging this woman. Not because I thought she was innocent, but because there was something fundamentally wrong. And he could never quite put his finger on it, but I do know he wrote his letter of resignation after that execution.
After she was hanged, Desmond Cusson moved to Australia. In the UK, the impact of Ruth Ellis's death eventually played a part in changing the legal system.
She changed 2 laws, really. She contributed hugely to the abolition of capital punishment. The year after she was hanged, the defence of diminished responsibility was put on the statute books because it was obvious to everybody that she was not in her right mind. However calm she might have appeared, she was not in her right mind.
It's a sad story in a way, isn't it?
It is. It is. I've got enormous sympathy for Ruth Ellis because she just didn't have the self-awareness to be able to drag herself out of the mire she'd got herself in. And I think the only way out was to kill herself. And being a good Catholic girl, she couldn't do that, so she let the hangman do it for her.
I don't think this was a woman that ever harmed anybody in her life and probably would never have harmed anybody again in her life, except for that moment of madness. Were she here sitting with us today, would have said it wasn't madness, Lawrence, it was excessive provocation.
At the root of the Ruth Ellis story is this idea of gender assumption, the idea that we have to justify how women might kill because the balance of their mind is temporarily disturbed or because it's a crime of passion. Nonsense. It's just that some women can be violent.
Because of Ruth Ellis, the phrase crime of passion is used in our everyday parlance. The law now takes into account the circumstances leading up to and surrounding an act of murder within the context of a relationship.
You have to remember, crime always has a victim. But in the case of convicted murderer Ruth Ellis, well, some would say she was just as much a victim as David Blakely, the lover she killed.
Paul was a man of untold evil. Yet he always conducted himself like a perfect gentleman.
Archibald Hall was a con man and a serial killer that would stop at nothing to get the luxurious lifestyle he desired.
This is just an animal. He can't be human to do these things because he showed no remorse whatsoever.
Archibald Hall was one of Scotland's most enigmatic serial killers, a man of multiple personalities who used his charms to seduce and deceive. Within a period of just 6 months, Hall was transformed from conman into callous killer, murdering no less than 5 people, including his own brother. I want to learn more about the man who became known as the Monster Butler. I'm Fred Dinenage and I'm investigating Britain's most notorious killers. I want to know what motivates someone to murder, sentencing themselves to death or a lifetime behind bars.
The Monster Butler, Archibald Hall, cultivated a life of glitz and glamour, using names and plot lines straight out of Hollywood movies. The man from a working-class background made himself high society. But to what extent have the facts become lost in fiction? What's the real story behind this serial killer?
One man who's re-examined the case in the hope of discovering the truth behind the fantasist is author and lawyer Alan Nicol.
According to him, he was a sort of potential folk hero. But when you look at his story, it's tawdry. It's not attractive at all. He was not anything of a hero. In fact, he was the exact opposite. I think what makes him stand out is that he only killed people he knew. Most psychopaths kill complete strangers. It's only if you actually knew him that you were in grave danger.
Archibald Thompson Hall was born in Glasgow in 1924 to a working-class family. He was the eldest of 3 children and heavily resented being named after his father, insisting on being called Roy instead.
I think he was brought up by 2 caring parents, but I don't think they acted together in bringing up Hall. I particularly think the mother certainly enjoyed undermining Hall Senior's authority over the boy, and she certainly indulged him as much as she could.
Hall was a keen movie fan, and the silver screen of the 1940s displayed grandeur and wealth, casting actors as suave and debonair rogues, an appealing role to the teenager. In order to achieve his dream lifestyle, Hall became involved in petty theft and housebreaking. In 1941, the law caught up with the 17-year-old and he received his first prison sentence. He was judged mentally unstable and sent to a psychiatric unit, but this did not deter Hall. Influences on the early life of a serial killer can determine the adult they will become. And someone who studied Archibald Hall's teenage years is criminologist Professor David Wilson.
Hall doesn't want to talk about that because Hall, the adult man, wants to pretend that his life is glamorous and aspirational and is something that should be desired. So he doesn't want to draw attention to the fact that actually he's been certified as insane on at least 2 occasions. That part of his history gets rubbed out, and other parts of his history, if we can believe him, are brought to the fore, such as his sexual magnetism.
Hall spent the next 10 years in prisons and mental institutions. He put his time to good use, though. He studied etiquette and learnt about the aristocracy. He dulled his Scottish accent and taught himself elocution. Archibald Hall had become Roy Fontaine, the perfect gentleman.
Hall realized that if he wanted to play this kind of upper-class figure, that he had to change his Glaswegian accent. He had to soften the accent. He had to become more anglicized. So his first day in prison, rather than changing his behavior, just made Hall realize that if he wanted access to this lifestyle that he craved, he had to change his behavior accordingly.
Hall's determination to gain the lifestyle he desired was never dulled by his time in prison. Resisting any sort of rehabilitation, he formed new strategies of how to make his money. When his mother gained employment as a housekeeper, Hall realized this was a great position of trust within the home.
And of course, the male version of a housekeeper is a butler. And Hall very quickly puts two and two together so that he realizes that if he becomes a butler, he'll have access to a house, access to valuables, access to bank accounts that the owner of the house might have, and realizes he can use this position of trust to abuse that position of trust to steal and to make his way as he would like.
Over the next 25 years, Hall transformed into a professional butler, conning his way from job to job.
How elaborate was he as a con man? Was he good at it?
He would certainly have you believe that. In his book, which is called A Perfect Gentleman, he goes through and describes the various cons that he himself thought up and then perpetrated. For instance, he goes into a shop pretending he's an American businessman, and he carries it off perfectly, and everyone believes he's a businessman with great credit, etc. He also had the scam whereby you go and look at a ring, and he would claim he had a ring made up that only cost £100, but this ring was worth £1,000, and he would deftly swap them, and the jeweller wouldn't notice.
Stealing was Archibald Hall's favourite crime, but he wasn't very good at it. He tried his hand at forgery, breaking into shops and swiping jewels from the rich. But Hall was regularly caught by the police and frequently spent time in prison. In 1973, he met David Wright, a small-time crook who'd have a big impact on the life of Hall.
David Wright was a criminal that Hall met at Long Larton Jail in Evesham in Worcestershire when he was serving another prison sentence. And as Hall would talk about, he sort of fell in love with Wright. Wright was an attractive, handsome, younger man. And of course, within prisons, there's often situational homosexuality. Now, Hall knew how to use his sexuality to get what he wanted. So when Hall's released first from Long Larton prison, and then Wright is going to follow to where Hall is.
Hall's determination for wealth and fine living drove him on. After each stint in prison, his ferocity grew, and he quickly set about looking for employment, seeking out bigger and better rewards.
In 1977, Scottish landowner Lady Peggy Hudson was looking for a new butler. The man she hired was cultured, knowledgeable, and would work for low wages. But was he too good to be true? Scottish journalist Frank Ryan covered Hall's hunt for fame and fortune. You were one of the few reporters, if not the only reporter, to talk to Lady Hudson in depth.
That's right.
And what did she tell you about Archibald Hall? I mean, what he was earning, etc.
Well, she said she had got him through an agency, and she had got a reference from a Mr. Wooten, who was in fact his father-in-law, but purported to be a businessman or some person of authority who could give a reference. So she was conned by that. He earned £20 a week, which was very low, even then. And she asked him why he was prepared to work for such a low salary when he could have been earning money either in the jewellery trade or in London. And he said that he loved living in the country, and he was prepared to sacrifice salary for the life at Kirtleton.
But for conman Hall, it wasn't a sacrifice, it was all part of his plan.
What about the interesting relationship between Archibald Hall and Lady Hudson? I mean, he was going to rob her, wasn't he?
Yes, I think so. And he was also organising robberies of big houses, country houses in the area. But he liked Lady Hudson. He said in his autobiography, written in jail, A Perfect Gentleman, that he had sex with her, just for charity, he said. But that could be boastful, you know, because he was very prone to fantasy and boasting.
The Monster Butler was in position and had set up the perfect con.
Archibald Hall was out to make a killing. I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm re-examining the case of the con-man turned murderer called the Monster Butler. By the age of 53, Archibald Hall had been in prison 10 times for theft, forgery and possession of firearms. He was obsessed with fame and fortune. He would do anything to obtain the Hollywood lifestyle he so desired.
Archibald Hall had gained employment working for Scottish landowner Lady Peggy Hudson. He'd smoothed his way in as her butler and made himself her perfect gentleman. Hall's young lover from prison, David Wright, had been released and decided to join him in Scotland. Lady Hudson took an instant liking to Wright and he became her odd job man. This proved a problem for conman Hall.
Wright knows that Hall really isn't a butler, but somebody who's going to steal from Lady Hudson. So quite clearly there was tension between the two of them from a very early stage. And that tension, it mounts and mounts until eventually, according to Hall, Wright stole a diamond ring from Lady Hudson that Hall then has to get back and replace before Lady Hudson realizes what has happened.
Their relationship reached a crisis point when Wright returned after a night of heavy drinking and fired a shot into Hall's headboard as he slept. He then hit Hall around the face with his pistol, causing his lover to bleed. Wright begged for forgiveness. Hall decided enough was enough.
Solicitor Len Murray heard firsthand what happened next from the Monster Butler himself.
The following day, out they went shooting rabbits. Wright with a shotgun and Hall with a .22 rifle. Hall counted very carefully the number of shots that Wright had in his gun. He had a total of 8. And when he had made sure that 8 had gone, he lifted his .22 and pointed it at a rabbit and gradually swung it round and shot Wright in the head. And he shot him not once, but he shot him 4 times. 1 in the head, and then 3 more in his torso. An extraordinarily cold killing.
At the age of 53, conman Hall had committed his first murder.
What they do know for certain is he took Wright's body, he placed it beside a stream, he covered it with clods of earth, and he kept going back and covering it up and covering it up, and he ended up taking Lady Hudson's Labrador for walks just to see if the dog could detect there was a body there, and eventually the dog didn't even notice.
Hall explained Wright's disappearance by informing Lady Hudson that the young man had been offered a permanent position in Torquay and had left. Hall, it seemed, had got away with killing his lover.
He remained as Lady Hudson's butler for some time, but by that time she had her doubts about him, and she had a local policeman check him out. He was given a police escort from the premises, and he ended up in a hotel in Gretna that night.
Undeterred, Hall continued with his criminal ways. He travelled to London and conned his way into another job as a butler for the wealthy elderly couple, the Scott Elliots. Once again, someone else had fallen for Hall's perfect gentleman act. Professor David Wilson has invited me to find out how and why so many people were caught out by the effectiveness of Hall as a conman.
Fred, con artists rely on their powers of persuasion, their charm, their ability to seduce you, and their confidence to carry the con off. Now, what I'm set up for you today is just a little experiment to see if you can work out who the con artist is and who's telling the truth. You're going to meet 5 guests. One of these guests is a multi-millionaire. They have their own food business. They made their first million by the age of 18. And I want you to ask them a few questions to see if you can determine who's telling the truth and who's telling you a lie. Okay, let's have the first guest come in to meet you. Hello, Lucy. Please have a seat.
Hello.
Now, Lucy, Fred's going to ask you 1 or 2 questions. Fred.
What do you do for a living?
I make natural food products, originally recipes by my grandmother, and I sell them in the UK in supermarkets here, and I've just started selling them in Australia as well.
Let's have our second guest who's going to meet you.
What do you do for a living?
We run a food business. It's an old recipe handed down from my grandma.
What sort of recipe?
It's for curry sauce.
Is this becoming more complex
Yes,
for
it
you?
is.
Because when I say multi-millionaire, have you got some stereotypes in your head?
You kind of build a picture of what a millionaire might look like, and of course that needn't necessarily be the case at all.
I own a jam company called Super Jam.
A jam company? Yeah. How did this start?
It started when I was 14 years old, and my grandmother taught me how to make jam one afternoon, and I started making it as a hobby and selling it to the neighbours and at farmers markets, and now we supply all the big supermarkets.
Where are you based?
We're based in Edinburgh.
I run the Hawthorne Company, which produces organic chutneys that use the finest natural ingredients.
Where are you based?
We're based in North Hertfordshire.
How many people do you employ?
We employ 20.
Right, where are you based?
I'm based in the northwest.
In the northwest?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
Up in a little village up there.
What's it called?
It's called Darwin.
Where's it near?
It's near Blackburn.
You've met our 5 guests. Tell me about them. What did you think of the 5 people that you met? Who's your money on, do you
My
think?
money, in fact, is on the gentleman I met with the homemade curries.
Why have you chosen VJ?
VJ just seemed to me to live the part. He felt to me the real thing. There was a confidence about him. There was a sort of knowledgeable thing about him. To me, he just fitted the bill.
So when I say multi-millionaire, do you mind gender? Is it going to be a man as opposed to a woman? Is it going to be somebody who's Afro-Caribbean or Asian, or as opposed to somebody who's white, somebody who's middle-aged, or somebody who's young?
Yes. No, I mean, it could literally be any one of these 5.
But you're still sticking with VJ?
I'm sticking with my man.
Okay. Well, Fred, VJ is not our multi-millionaire.
I never liked VJ.
And therefore, let me give you a second guess.
My second guess then is going to be the gentleman in the middle, the young man in the middle. I've just got a funny feeling about him.
Well, Fred,
yes,
Fraser is a multi-millionaire.
Wow, it's incredible. And all thanks to your grandmother.
Yeah, yeah, she's delighted to see it all take off, and she still goes into the supermarket and rearranges the jars and makes sure they're all facing the front. And
Incredible, great success story. Congratulations to you. Archibald Hall's trick of the trade was he looked the part, he was very smart, and he talked the talk, but you don't even have to be that anymore, do you?
No, I think obviously cultures change from the 50s and 60s. People who wore a uniform in the 1960s had authority. Now when people wear a uniform, we tend to think of them in a service capacity. So Hall was playing on stereotypes. When somebody said that he was living the high life, he had to wear a suit like Matt. He had to have his shoes polished. Nowadays, look, Fraser's our company owner who's a multimillionaire, who's very casually dressed. So we're playing with stereotypes all the time. But the key thing was, if you're a con artist, you deliver those cons with confidence. You have to be persuasive. You have to use charm. You have to be believable.
And after 40 years of practicing as a con artist, Archibald Hall had his act well polished. In November 1977, he'd worked his way into the lives of Mr. Walter Scott Elliot and his wife Dorothy. His position as butler would give him access to their prized valuables.
They were very wealthy people. He was a former MP, and she was Indian by birth, the daughter of a very wealthy Indian merchant. And when he went to London, he met up with Mary Coggles, Belfast Mary as she was known. And Mary had been a lady whose virtue was comparatively easily overcome by money, if I may put it that way. And she introduced him to Michael Kitto.
Michael Kitto was a small-time crook from London who drifted from job to job. He'd been in prison 3 times when he met Hall in 1977. Hall was looking for his next con. Kitto was in awe.
Hall had only been working at the Scott Elliots for a month when he and Kitto went out one night to discuss how they were going to rob the elderly couple. But their best-laid plans went awry when they returned to the Scott Elliot house looking for more wine.
They went and raided the fantastic wine cellar the Scott Elliots had. And the way down, Mrs. Scott Elliot, unexpectedly, they thought she was out, came to the door, and she asked what was happening. And Hall said that Kitto sprang forward, assaulted the lady, she fell, and she was found to be dead.
Another con, and another murder.
Hall dreamt of ending his days with one big job, courtesy of the Scott Elliots. But his plans for a luxury retirement went horribly wrong. Archibald Hall, the monster butler, now faced another dilemma, disposing of a second murder victim, Mrs. Dorothy Scott Elliot. I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm retracing one of the most macabre murder stories of the 20th century, that of Scottish killer Archibald Hall.
At the age of 53, Hall had killed his first victim, David Wright, a 30-year-old conman. Only 5 months later, Hall's latest plan to rob his new employers, the Scott Elliots, had gone very wrong. In December 1977, Hall and his accomplice Michael Kitto had killed Mrs. Dorothy Scott Elliot. There was now a second body to dispose of.
You know, if it wasn't so sad, it would almost be like an Ealing comedy. They decide that what they're going to do with Mrs. Scott Elliot is take her body in the boot of a rented car to Scotland and dump it. And they're going to drug Walter Scott Elliot so that he's not really fully compos mentis of what's going on. They're going to have Mary Coggle dress up in Dorothy Scott Elliot's clothes, and in particular her mink coat, and she's going to pretend to be Walter Scott Elliot's wife.
Hall, Kitto and Coggle had kidnapped Walter Scott Elliot, the 82-year-old former MP. His wife, Dorothy, had just been murdered, and now, unaware of his fate, he faced a terrifying journey to Scotland, where they intended to dispose of her body.
He became a hostage to them, and I think that's one of the cruelest parts of Hall's story. He paid the bills when they stayed over, and there were several days went by where they had him with them, and they kept him drugged up. Hall decided that at some point they would have to kill him. Now, Hall tries to rationalise this by saying we had no alternative, but when you look at this story, it doesn't really hang together. He was enjoying having his former employer as a hostage. He was like a sort of trophy.
Walter Scott Elliot was now more than 500 miles from his home in London. He'd become a liability for the murderous pair. It was time for him to be disposed of. In this remote Scottish landscape, Hall and Kitto killed again.
One version is that he wanted to get out the car to relieve himself, and he went down just off the road and Hall came down and tried to strangle him. Now, this is an old man in his 80s who was suffering from pretty extreme Alzheimer's, but it would appear as though he put up an enormous fight, and he was too strong for Hall on his own, and Hall had to summon Kitto, and Kitto got a spade from the boot and walloped Scott Elliot over the head and killed him virtually instantly.
A third brutal murder. Walter Scott Elliot had been killed just days after his wife, his body abandoned in Glenafric in Scotland. Mary Coggle, the 51-year-old from Belfast, enjoyed impersonating the wealthy Mrs. Scott Elliot and remained naively oblivious to the actions of her fellow criminals, Hall and Kitto.
It's a puzzle, because Mary Coggle was living a bit of a dream here, because she was going about wearing Dorothy Scott Elliott's hugely expensive mink coat. She was wearing a wig. She was wearing the fantastic jewellery that Mrs. Scott Elliott had. And that's all that mattered to Mary. I don't think she realised the danger she was in.
According to Hall, he became really annoyed that Mary Coggle was wearing Mrs. Scott Elliott's mink coat. He felt this was drawing attention to Mary Coggle in the towns and villages in Scotland that they were passing through. Hall claimed that she simply couldn't carry that kind of act off, and therefore became increasingly concerned that she was drawing attention to them. Hall again claims that he was going to kill Mary Coggle quite quickly, but again, here's part of the sexual magnetism that he always claims for himself. She persuades Hall to have sex on the mink coat in front of a fire, and that, therefore, according to Hall, meant that he felt he should let her live. In any event, that kind of change of heart about not killing her doesn't last very long, and then eventually he's going to take a poker to her head. Kitto comes from behind her and holds her, and then they put a plastic bag over her head so as to suffocate her, even after hitting her with the poker.
51-year-old Mary Coggle was dead. Kitto and Hall then dressed their accomplice up in men's clothing and dumped her in this stream here. The murderous duo quickly left Scotland, heading south to Hall's sisters for Christmas in Staffordshire.
Would Hall, do you think, from what you know of him, have felt remorse for her death, and indeed any of the other deaths?
No. Throughout my dealings with him, one of his trademarks, if you like, was the fact that he never at any time displayed any kind of remorse. And it was almost as though he was boasting of what he had done.
On Christmas Day 1977, a 29-year-old policeman, Alan Place, was called to Middleby in Scotland, where a woman's body had been found. He was given the job of securing the area for CID.
My wife and the kids, they were small at the time, we just sat down to a Christmas lunch when the phone rang. This was the office. A woman's body's been found in a wee burn between Middleby and Waterbeck, so it was all hands to the pump. So we all collected at Lockerbie Police Station and then made our way to the locus of this body.
What scene did you see down there?
When we arrived here, the body was actually just down almost in the culvert, as if it had just been tipped over. So, I mean, all you could see was the body of what appeared to be a female.
Was it a shocking scene? Was it one that stuck in your mind?
It sounds callous, but it was just another body. It wasn't a gruesome thing. She hadn't been battered to pieces. It was just a body that had some head and facial injuries. But other than that, it would have been difficult to say without post-mortem to say how she died.
But he made no effort to cover the body over down there?
None whatsoever.
Why?
Well, I think it would be an opportunist. He would come along here Where he had killed her, we don't know, but presumably put her in the boot of a car and come along here, saw the road was quiet, quickly stopped, out across the bridge parapet, and that would have been it. He'd have been off in case anybody did come.
The Scottish police had a body with no name and no clue as to the killer. Hall, unaware of their discovery, met up with his younger brother, Donald.
Donald Hall was Archibald's younger brother. He'd followed in his brother's criminal footsteps and had just been released from prison, having served 3 years for burglary. But that's where the similarity ended. Donald was unkempt and filthy in appearance, quite different to Archibald, the perfect gent.
Hall's brother, Donald, was the complete antithesis of Hall. He was a scruffy individual, long hair, thought to be a paedophile, and Hall just couldn't stand the sight of him. And things got worse when Donald said he wanted part of the action. He wanted to get in on these raids that he was convinced Hall was planning.
Hall and Kitto took Donald back to a cottage they were renting in Cumbria, where they enjoyed a night of fine dining and drinking. On the second night, Donald became overexcited about the intended burglary of Lady Hudson and insisted he would be an asset to them.
He boasted to them of how you could tie a person up and render them absolutely incapable of any resistance by a very simple method of tying arms and legs. Put the person on the front and tie the arms behind the back and bend the legs up. And so Donald put himself in that position to demonstrate, and Hall and Kitto tied him up in the way that he suggested. And then his brother, Roy, soaked a cloth with chloroform and smothered him. I think it's the only chloroform murder in the UK.
Hall, not intent with just smothering his brother with the chloroform, then poured the substance down Donald's throat, killing him.
Hall would let nothing and no one stand in the way of achieving his dream of a luxury lifestyle. Donald Hall had become the Monster Butler's 5th victim, and just another body to be disposed of. I'm Fred Dinenage, and I'm reinvestigating the horrific crimes of Archibald Hall, the man more commonly known as the Monster Butler.
By January 1978, conman turned murderer Hall had killed 5 people in just 7 months. The latest victim, Donald, Hall's younger brother, had yet to be disposed of. The Scottish police had discovered the body of his 4th victim, Mary Coggle, but had no clue as to the killer. Hall's criminal plans to make a fortune weren't working. His dream of living the Hollywood lifestyle was fading fast. He and his accomplice, Michael Kitto, made a plan.
They hire a car. He tells Kitto, change the number plate on the car because 3 of the numbers are 999, and Hall thinks that's very unlucky. So Kitto did change the number plate, so the number plate and the tax disc, the road tax license, aren't going to match. So they have Donald Hall in the back of the car, they drive back to Scotland, they book into a hotel, they claim they're about to emigrate to Australia.
Hall's glib attitude normally got him out of difficult situations, but there was something about his attitude that the hotel owner didn't like, and he just thought he was too glib, and he suspected that they were about to commit some sort of board and lodgings fraud. And he spoke to his wife, and she didn't like the look of them either, and he called the local police. Now, the police turned up, they looked at the Granada that he was driving, and they found out that the tax disc didn't match up to the number plate.
Hall and Kitto were arrested and taken for questioning, while the dead body of Hall's brother Donald was still in the boot of the car.
Had Kitto and he kept their nerve, then they might have simply walked away half an hour later, gone back to their dinner or gone back to their hotel. When Kitto realised the situation he was in, his nerve went. In the meantime, Hall, who was very good at escaping, that's one thing he was excellent at, he threw away all the incriminating stuff in his pockets, he flushed them down the toilet, he jumped out the window in the police office, and I think that's when the police took the car to the police station and as a routine decided to just check what was in it, and then to their horror found there was a body.
Hall was soon recaptured, but faced with the daunting prospect of prison, he swallowed some pills he'd hidden about his person. He was taken to Edinburgh Hospital and treated quickly. Archibald Hall and Michael Kitto were under arrest, but the true extent of their crime spree was still unknown.
Tell me about your first meeting with Archibald Hall, also known as Roy Fontaine.
He was brought to Lockerbie for questioning with regards to various murders, etc., that had been happening in the area. I was one of the officers given the task with the job of looking after him while he was being interviewed.
Were you handcuffed to him?
I handcuffed to him all the time, even as far as being in the cell, having meals, etc. You sat beside him with him, handcuffed to you. So.
What was he like? Can you describe him to me?
Very well dressed and very well spoken, a sort of educated English accent, but every now and again you got the wee bit Glasgow coming through in him, you know.
In London, police officers received a tip-off from an antique dealer about some stolen silver belonging to the Scott Elliots. The police discovered the elderly couple's home had been ransacked. Walter and his wife Dorothy were missing.
He didn't tell many lies, but he didn't tell much truth either. His attitude sort of was, he wasn't sort of against the police, but his attitude was that, well, you tell me who I've murdered and I'll tell you whether you're right or not, and I'll tell you where I've put them.
Police officers in Scotland started the search for the bodies. Mr. Walter Scott Elliot was found on the 18th of January 1978. 3 days later, Hall gave up information on his first victim, David Wright. He was taken to the Kirtleton estate to show police where his body was hidden.
You were there when Wright's body was found.
Yes, I can always remember it was a terribly cold, it had been a long cold spell, and it was a right snowy day, and we were showing where the body was, and a whole team of us, and of course the chief constable was there. We went to the place which had been described and shown to us indeed by Hall, and we excavated the body off Wright, which was quite something as he'd been buried for a wee while, and he was then taken back obviously to the mortuary.
He was in a bit of a state.
It was a bit of a state, aye. Not a pleasant job. We carried him actually on an old door. We didn't have a stretcher, so he was rolled onto an old door that we found on the Kirtleton estate, and he was carried unceremoniously back to Kirtleton, where he was put in the back of a recovery vehicle.
On the 23rd of January 1978, Hall took the police to the location of the last body, that of Mrs. Dorothy Scott Elliot. Archibald Hall's reign of terror had ended. On the 2nd of May 1978, Hall and Kitto appeared at the High Court in Edinburgh, charged with the murders of David Wright and Walter Scott Elliot. Both were found guilty. Hall was given 2 life sentences, Kitto was given 1 life sentence. Hall and Kitto were then due for sentencing in England for the murders of Mary Coggle, Dorothy Scott Elliot and Hall's brother, Donald. Len Murray was Hall's solicitor for the Scottish trials.
It became perfectly obvious from the start he wasn't going to contest it, and he was going to hold his hands up and plead guilty. And that day was Kitto's birthday. And in the High Court, He turned from the dock as they were going to be led downstairs, and he turned to the press benches, and I was sitting just a few feet away, and he said to the press, "Ah, well, life begins at 40. An extraordinary thing to say."
Hall and Kitto's English sentencing was held on the 1st of November 1978 at the Old Bailey. Hall received a further 2 life sentences for the murder of Mary Cogle and Donald Hall, but denied Mrs. Scott Elliott's murder. It was recommended Michael Kitto serve at least 15 years and Hall serve life.
What were your feelings for this chap that you'd been handcuffed to?
It was more amazement than anything else. You know, bad enough murdering one person, but once the whole thing had unravelled itself, you thought, my God, this is just an animal. He can't be human to do these things, because he showed no remorse whatsoever.
As the years passed by, Hall was moved from prison to prison and became resigned to the fact he would never be released. During this time, he penned 2 autobiographies, retelling his life story in the style of a Hollywood adventure movie.
When investigating the circumstances of this story, for the first time in my life, I watched a film called Raffles with David Niven in it, and you could see Hall shining through. And when you look at the way Hall acted, I think he used that as a sort of template for his life. And he was astonished that people didn't regard him as David Niven or Cary Grant in To Catch a Thief.
Hall really did think of himself as a cut above the rest, as somebody who was sexually dynamic, sexually magnetic to both genders. Hall lived a fantasy life, but the tragedy is, of course, that Hall ultimately also had some deep-seated psychopathy. Hall is somebody who's going to seduce people so as to take things from them, and sometimes that involved taking their lives. This is not a nice man.
Michael Kitto served his time and has since been released, though no one's quite sure where he is today. In 2002, Archibald Hall died of a stroke at the age of 78 at Kingston Prison in Portsmouth.
He had a shocking record for theft. You know, by the time he died, he had been sentenced to a total of 81 years imprisonment, plus 2 life sentences, plus 3 committals to a psychiatric hospital. Looking back on it now, it was quite the most extraordinary case. Perhaps for all the wrong reasons, he was probably one of the most unforgettable characters I ever met.
There's a saying that money is the root of all evil, and never was that more the case than with Archibald Hall, the Monster Butler. He committed forgery, theft and murder. He even killed his own brother in order to obtain the luxurious lifestyle he so desired. In the end, his relentless greed came to nothing as far as he was concerned. He ended up with what he deserved: a lifetime behind bars.